Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon's session. Thank you for joining us for the CLI Outmar Innovation and Legal Tech Week 2021 in the topic area of leading change. My name is Fiona and I'm the L&D manager at Outmar. This is our second session of the day and is Legally Agile, 5 Laws Learned from the Digital World. And joining us today are Sebastian Bohle, Francesco Bianchi and Ethan Murray from Oliver Wyman.
On behalf of CLI, I would just like to welcome our faculty, Francesco, Sebastian and Ethan, for being here, and thank everyone for joining this session. Now over to Ethan.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for coming here. Thank you for giving us your time. We know you're all busy, and in a remote friendly world, you could equally be doing something else right now. So we've been preparing very hard to try to make this session actually worthwhile for you. Our goal is that you come out of this with something that you can apply immediately this week, that you feel was well worth the time you spent with us, and hopefully you get a lot more. So before we get started, I have to confess something. I know very little about the legal profession. So you might ask, why am I here? Well, Terry from the Center for Legal Innovation contacted me because I had published an article in Harvard Business Review about how to make virtual working, remote working great. And that's a real passion of mine. It's something I've been talking to hundreds of organizations about over the past year because a lot of people need it now. And if you give me just a moment on a soapbox, I'll say, if you have done a lot of remote working last year and you hadn't done it before, then probably it's been only about 20% as good as it could be. Because a really great remote working experience is amazing. You get all of the benefits you've seen, a lot more you haven't seen, and you don't have the drawbacks that a lot of people have experienced. So this is what I was very passionate about, I'm writing about, talking about. Now, Terry very astutely recognized that as I was describing this, about half of the ingredients of it came from the Agile world, the movement, the methodology of Agile. And she told me, oh, well, the legal profession is increasingly interested in trying out Agile methods, and asked if we could come and share them with you all. So that's why I'm here as a non-law expert, because I do know a lot about Agile. I actually lead Oliver Wyman's digital practice, which is a team of about 600 people using Agile methodology and delivering hundreds of projects all over the world. And I know a lot about it personally, but I'm not the best expert. Since I founded that team about 10 years ago, it's been my primary focus to find much better experts than myself for everything we do. And when it comes to Agile, our best experts are Francesco and Seb. So I'm going to hand over to them in a moment. They are really great at this. They've led many successful Agile efforts in technology, but also they've applied it in corporate functional departments like marketing and sales. They've even led executive strategy setting workshops and similar using these Agile methodologies. So I'll give them to you and you to them in a moment. You'll get the real value out of this from them. But before that, I just want to make one really important point, which is what Agile can do for you. Because I mentioned that I founded our digital team 10 years ago. Before that, I was a regular management consultant with Oliver Wyman, operating in the regular way of working. And it was very inefficient. It was disorganized. It was often really emotionally taxing because people would get in each other's way and tensions would simmer. When I started doing this technology thing, I was reading and exploring all about the field, and I discovered Agile, tried it, started using it on projects and with teams, and I became a convert. I saw the light. It was amazing how much better it made work and collaboration and efficiency. And as I used it more and more, I realized it wasn't at all about doing technical work. It was just a good way of forming teams and working. And I've used it across all types of work that I've done. I even use it with my family. Literally every week, my 3 kids and my partner and I use Agile methods to plan our lives, to improve how we do things. I'll tell you about that at the end after you've learned the methods. So it's awesome. I think it can help anyone. And if you haven't tried it and haven't really lived it with someone helping you do it well, because you can read a lot, you can hear about it, but it's not quite the same as the true art of doing it. So I hope that this kind of magical fairy dust of Agile that can make anything better will land in your lives too and help you out. And Francesco and Seb will try to share as much as they can pack into the next 90 minutes on it. But it's also very much up to you, because try as they might to understand how it applies in the legal profession, they won't know as well as you do. So please listen closely. Think about how you could use each of these methods and tools that they give you, either at work or at home. And please, while they are talking, jot down at least one thing that you can try this week. So that's my assignment, my homework for you. And with that, I will hand off to Francesco and Seb.
Great intro. Thank you so much, Ethan. Thank you, everybody, for spending this time with us today. We've got a program for you where, as Ethan said, we want to give you as many concrete pointers and as many things as possible for you to take away and to use in your life, in professionally or personally. Let's take a quick peek at the agenda for today so that you've got an idea of what we have in store for you. So first of all, we want to give you a bit of a lay of the land. We want to talk about the basics. We do not want to teach you Agile. We don't think that's the scope of the session, but we do want to contextualize it a little bit for you. We then want to talk about how can you break down work into digestible units so that you can actually manage them and get clarity on them in a much better way. How do you decide on priorities? How do you decide what's important, and how do you decide where to spend your time? How do you understand what's going on, not just with your own personal work, but also in your teams and with your people? And how can you learn from your mistakes so that you can continuously improve the way you're working and collaborating in your teams?
Let's start by introducing us a little bit, mostly because you probably want to understand where we come from. Seb and I are very, very different. You can see here the training path, the training journey I went through in the last 18 months. And I was a certification addicted, a badge addicted. For me, everything had to come with a badge. And I studied a lot. And on the other end of the spectrum, our Seb.
So here are my credentials. I have no certificate. I'm a practitioner by heart. I've been practicing Agile methods in one context or another, sometimes in product-focused contexts, but also in business-focused contexts for 7 years. And as you can see, Francesco and I, we take quite different approaches. In our collaboration, we bring a lot of different perspectives together, help ourselves, keeping us honest, and that's the way we collaborate together. The purpose of us showing you this is because there is one thing where we do agree and where we're very similar, and that's what's at the heart of Agile, and that launches us straight into our first segment today.
Thank you, Seb. And Heart of Agile is exactly what we would like to talk to you about. It's not a brilliant idea we came up with. Alistair Cockburn, and I'll mention again this guy later, came up with this model. And it may seem very, very simplistic, but I can tell you that after years of research, after spending hours trying things and failing and succeeding, and quite a lot of money and weekends and holidays in trying to study and building a lot of knowledge, actually everything boils down to these 4 things. Agile is as simple as this. And I think we often forget what working in a team together with people and with clients is about. It's really only these 4 words: is collaborate, to deliver, and to do that better, we want to improve over time. And in order to be able to improve, we need to spend some time reflecting. It's as simple as this. Everything else comes into this. So all the rest of the session, try to use this as a compass and try to see where the different techniques will fit. They will all try to solve one of these problems. I found this incredibly powerful, and I found this at the end of our learning journey. But when I started doing some research, like any of you who may be interested in Agile so far may have come across, this is what the landscape looked like. There's a plethora of methods. There's a myriad of different names and acronyms and approaches and different things. I will read just a few. I don't know half of them. Scrum, Experience in Experience Programming, DSTM, TDD, BDD, SAFe, LESS, and Spotify model. I'm sure you've heard Kanban, and many, many more that don't fit in this slide, because the moment this was written, this was already old, because new things come up every month probably, if not even more frequently. But again, I would like to remind you, Agile is simple, and is as simple as, if we go back to what the real and original definition on Agile is, this is it. This is the manifesto for the eagle eye of you in the crowd, written in February 2001, so exactly 20 years ago. There's actually a big festival going on in the Agile community to revamp it. But this is everything Agile really is. All the rest is structure that has been built on top of it by people who are trying to solve problems according to these principles. Agile is a set of principles, is not a management method. Anyone trying to sell you something different is failing, is telling you something that is not correct. And the idea here, you can read it by yourself. We tweak it a little bit just because the origin is in the software industry. We wanted to make it a little bit more generic. As Ethan said, over years, we discovered that, yeah, Agile applies to everything, every collaborative activity. You can see that the approach is very much based on doing and discovering. We assume that we don't have all the solutions, and we discover them by doing them together. And we favor certain things over others. There's nothing prescriptive. There's nothing right or wrong. Things depend on the situation. Our ability is to understand what to favor in what case. And typically what we see on the left in blue are the things that we tend to favor over the other ones. And the one on the right are the typical of standard project management, traditional project management. But we tend to like more individuals and interactions over strict processes and tools. We'll talk about tools, but the tools that we'll describe today are just at your disposal for you to use if and when they're appropriate. You don't need to use them by the book every single time. You want working software or a valid solution that you can discuss and you can use over comprehensive documentation. You want to collaborate with your customer instead of negotiating a contract. And this may sound funny in a legal conference, but actually very often instead of sending 2,000 emails and writing a contract on how you will end up writing a contract, it's so much easier to get your client in a room and build things with them, at least a first draft that hits a few points that you need, and then you can refine it later. The last one is very important too, like all of them, but maybe is more relevant these days, especially with this year after the pandemic or during the pandemic still. It's responding to change over following a plan. And we'll discuss a little bit more about that aspect. So we said that Agile is sold as a very complicated thing, may look very complicated if we do a research, but it's actually very, very simple. Exactly the opposite is life. Life, we always, or the plans that we do, we always assume that they are simple, they will go straight, nothing will go wrong. But we know by experience that even the most simplest thing, the simplest task, like going to a grocery shop to buy the cheese that you want or whatever is the thing that you want to buy, very often may end up in an odyssey where you need to, they ran out of something, you're going to need to find a different brand, or they don't have what you want, and you end up down a rabbit hole trying to find the one thing that you wanted to buy. And this is a phenomenon that in work, but in everything, in every aspect of life, is more and more common and is being defined as VUCA, with the acronym VUCA. Our reality is now more and more volatile. Any assumption we make today may not hold true tomorrow. It's uncertain. We can't start from solid foundation. Things are not precise, and we often don't have the luxury to investigate to make sure that they are precise. Things are complex, which is quite different from complicated. And complex is something that has so many variables at play that it's basically impossible to predict the outcome and how the different variables will interact and play together. And it's ambiguous. And just think of any conversation you've had with a client and imagine how many times you've misunderstood each other. It happens between team members, people expert in the field. It happens so much more with clients. And we don't have any more the luxury to go and try, build, see that it fails, go back and build it again, build it again. So how to reconcile, how to be able to make a sense of this complexity when we're trying to tell you, and for now you just need to trust us. Hopefully we'll be able to show you a little bit more as we go, that everything is actually 4 words. Well, Collaborating is extremely simple, but it's not that simple, like Ethan was saying, if you have never lived through it. And so that's our offer for you. Try to find someone that can help you, someone who's expert. Even just to have a meeting. It seems so simple. It felt so simple in real life. I think that was not so simple. We just were able to ignore all the problems that we had, the dysfunctions that were present in meetings, and get the help of professionals. Here we collected a couple of names from a network built by Lisette Sutherland, who's one of the most famous agilists in the world in these days. And there are 3 local representatives that you can contact, and they can help you even just to improve the way you collaborate over meetings remotely. I'll pause here. At the end of each segment, and we'll have 5, 1 for each flow, we would like to give you a chance to ask any question. We'll keep it short for now, 1, 2 questions per segment, and we'll have a slightly longer Q&A session at the end of the full presentation.
So Francesco, since Joyce brought it up in chat, maybe you can tell us in 1 or 2 sentences a little bit about graphic recording.
Absolutely. So I would like to say that I'm a visual practitioner. I'm actually just a student for now. Visual practitioners are people who try to introduce, are visual people like me who believe in the power of visualization and try to introduce it in everything they do. In my case, that initially started as a way to explain abstract concepts to people. I discovered a method called Bicablo, and I can write down the name for you if you want to check it later. And I used that just to prepare flip charts for interactive activity. But then COVID happened, and there was not a very good use of paper and things. And so I started using them to decorate my home or my backgrounds, because virtual backgrounds don't work well with my hair. But they also discovered something that Seb just mentioned, graphic recording, which is a fantastic way to record on a piece of paper or on a digital digital media, whatever you want, live thoughts, taking notes as if you were taking them for yourself, but you do them in a way that they are then shareable with other people. We try to organize your thoughts and to embellish them, but also enrich the meaning of what you're typing, adding small icons or bigger icons. Happy to describe more later if you want. Maybe just to add, for me, it's incredibly difficult. I started as a software developer. I've been in an industry who is intangible by definition for most of the time, and probably for you guys it's not too different. Having a way to see the concepts that we were talking about has been a life-changing experience. Being able to see people, but also to visualize what courage means, what honesty means, what a process is about. That's incredibly powerful. Okay. Thank you, Ethan, for the addition. Yes, we are quite international today. If you are okay, I would move to segment 2, and then we can use all the rest of the time to discuss about anything that inspires you. Let me share back my screen. So I'm gonna be with you for segment 2, and then I'll pass the ball to our Seb. Nod if you can see the screen, please. Yeah, fantastic. So segment 2 is about breaking down your work. And I would like to try an experiment. Let's see how that goes. Now my chat has disappeared. There it is. Ethan shared that I'm from Dublin currently, but I'm actually Italian, as my name may suggest to some of you. And we are quite fond of our tiramisu. There are recipes that are shared by moms to their sons. It's a quite nice tradition of moms to their sons. And so somehow we develop our recipe, and it's quite consistent. I would like to ask you for fun, how long do you think it takes to prepare a tiramisu twice as large as the one you can see in the picture? Please drop your estimates in the chat. Remember to tick the checkbox. Fantastic. Things are coming through. 1 day with soaking. That's a recipe I need to discover. 1, 2, 3 hours. Okay. 30 minutes. You're very fast, David. Love that. And Anna too. So you probably work together. 20 minutes, it's a record. I don't know how you can do it. You got to tell me. Okay. Anna and Melissa, 2 hours. Fantastic. Oh, geez. There's a lot of stuff. Okay. So very, very spread of estimates, which is very, very interesting. And I would like to know why, but I can't interrogate all of you. Let's see what's the standard recipe of a tiramisu is. There are many variations. One, for example, I never use ladyfingers in mine, but a very specific biscuit, pavesini. So this is not a picture of my tiramisu, but my one's too horrible to see. So I picked a standard one. Let's explore the recipe. So what you do is typically separate the egg yolks from white. You mix the yolk with sugar and you whip it until it's creamy, and you put it in a container. You add the mascarpone, nothing else, just mascarpone. All the rest is wrong. This is one of the things where there is right and wrong. And you mix it together gently with the yolks and the sugar. And then you whip the whites until they are creamy in a second container. And then you combine them in one container. Yes, Anna, pavesini, that's right. In one container of your choice, then you take your pavesini that are not in the recipe, if you notice, and you assemble the tiramisu. So what I've done here has been explaining a very simple recipe. Now, people who have never prepared a tiramisu may start recognizing, having a better understanding of how much work is required. People who do that can validate whether the process is the same, because, for example, I've done tiramisu quite a few times, and I've eaten it many more times, but I've never known that there is something like soaking the tiramisu, and I'm sure it's delicious, but it's something that I would never consider. It's interesting to explore how even something as simple as a recipe like this can be broken down in many subtasks, but it can be broken down in a way that is not fully ready to be consumed. For example, assemble tiramisu here on the bottom. Sorry for the overlap. Doesn't go away. It's not very clear. You still don't know how to do it. Okay, you can know how to do it, but for example, there's no indication of what biscuits to buy. And even if you know exactly what biscuits to buy, when you read the recipe, there's nothing that prompts you to go and buy the biscuits. And even if you know what biscuits to buy, it's quite interesting because in different contexts, that process can take different amount of time. So the same recipe done by me in Italy would have taken me 10 minutes, go to the shop, any shop, and buy pavesini. I will find them, and mascarpone. Now in Ireland, I need to plan this recipe 1 week in advance because I need to go to two different shops. One for the cheese, the creamy cheese, and one for the biscuits, hoping that they have them. It's quite interesting. My estimates for a tiramisu is 1 hour of execution, quite precisely, and 1 week of planning. Okay. So why do we want to break down tasks? We've explored a few things that were missing from that recipe that we could have captured by being more precise. There are also some other benefits. The moment I have specific tasks, I can delegate them. Someone can mix the mascarpone and the yolks, and someone else can prepare the white. Those can be done in the same time. And yes, there will be some overhead to coordinate things, but at least I can have them progressing in parallel. It's easier to identify common tasks when we repeat the process. What if I asked you, how long does it take to prepare 2 tiramisu? You probably spend almost the same amount of time to prepare the egg and the mascarpone and the sugar. What you have to repeat is the cost of assembling. And if you're careful, you can probably reuse also the moment you go to the grocery to buy ingredients. it forces to think about the task that you actually need to perform, and that helps identifying missing parts. So that you don't have a bad surprise and you plan to spend 1 hour to assemble the tiramisu, just to remember that you didn't buy the ingredients, and they're not so easily to find. And it makes it easier to assess the impact of changing plans. What if I don't go to buy ingredients this week? Do I need to replan many other things? What happens if I prepare the white of the eggs instead of the yolk first? Maybe nothing, and that's okay. How does that map to Agile? So one of the most common methodologies, framework actually, is Scrum. And one of the things that Scrum suggests is to time box everything you do. Time box the work, time box the amount of time that you spend before you do check-in on your works. And the work that you do is typically split in what are called, generally in the Agile terms, iterations. For Scrum, they're called sprints, and they have a length that varies between 2 and 4 weeks. The idea is that you have a big product backlog on the left, a lot of items that are the result of breaking down a big activity that you need to take care of. And every sprint, you have available 2-4 weeks of people time, depending on the amount of people that you have in a team. And you select a subset of that product backlog. And you select it in a quite specific way. What you want to get out of it is not just work done, there's much more. You want to select your work so that at the end of that iteration, you have assembled something that is potentially shippable and is better and more than before. So that the first time I can come up with this guy, and it's fun, he's cute. I didn't think about it, but it's also Italian, which may be a nice coincidence. But you don't do much with that. You can put it on your desk and it decorates the desk and it's fine. And the next time you can add a mushroom. And the next sprint, you can add a pipe. And in few sprints time, you may have a game. But every single time you're building something that makes sense on its own. And it's better and more than the previous version. So that potentially, if you want, if it makes sense, you can ship it, you can sell it. It's not the final thing, but it sells. And we'll come back later to this concept, how this can help de-risk in the work that you do. Fantastic, we have bricks, we can use them to build stuff. But how would we like those bricks to be? Would be so nice if we imagine Lego. They are simple, incredibly simple, and the format is consistent. We would like them to be just enough. In my recipe, I didn't go into very much detail. I wrote just enough for you to be able, or for anyone reading it, to be able to execute it. And if we start from the assumption that if we need more detail, we can always ask it. But it's enough to get me started and to plan how to do the work. What do I do first? What do I need to be able to continue? We would like bricks that are focused on business value. We are not interested in doing busy work. There's enough work out there that we don't need to invent something else. We want to do work. We actually need to filter the work so that only the work that is delivering a lot of value actually filters, bubbles on top, and we pick that and we focus on that. So that minimum effort, maximum result. We would like to have these bricks more relatable and easier to understand because they're written in a language that is closer to the client, that the client can understand. And you can have an internal client if you work in a legal department, or can be an external client if you're a solicitor coming to you to review a contract or to do something. You want them to understand. That should be your first focus. You want them to understand how much effort it takes. You want to understand what are the consequences of what you're doing. How maybe you can get a quicker result, but just tweaking here and there. But to do that, to get to that agreement, to that negotiation, and to that flexibility in how you arrange things, you need to be able for your client to help you by understanding and by helping you prioritizing things in a different way as the needs evolve. And then I quoted technical people as a word because we would like them to be ready for technical, as in people expert in their field, like you are in the legal sector, to be able to go and have a second conversation among subject matter experts that helps you understanding what are the constraints, what are the limitations, what are the areas that can be exploited to reach a faster gain or a more valuable gain. There is a format like that in the industry. It's called user story. User because the focus is on the user performing an action. And that action is told in the format of a story if you want. You can see on top the standard format. It's very wide used in the Agile world. Some people don't like it anymore. There are many other alternatives. Take it just as an example to explore a concept, and then you can do whatever you prefer. But this is nice because you can read from the template. You have, as someone, I want to perform some action so that I get some benefit. You know, who's doing what they want to do, and why. So if we read an example of user story based on our exercise of before, I could say that as a person with a sweet tooth, which I am, I want to be able, typo here, to prepare the perfect tiramisu so that I don't need to wait to have a chance to visit my mom back in Italy to enjoy a masterpiece dessert. I know who I want to serve, who's my client, and here I'm qualifying the type of client they are, so I cannot give them a recipe for a savory cake. I understand what they want to achieve, and I understand their motivation, so that if I need to make a change, I have all the information that I need to make a change that the client is still happy about. And to try to make it a little bit more tangible, I hope I'm not writing anything silly here. I found this, you can find the link on the bottom of the page. I found this in a paper from one of your colleagues. These are examples of user stories of a not very lucky or not typically very positive situation of a marriage that is hitting a bad moment, and there's a divorce to be dealt with. You can read some stories, and I'm assuming that many of these will be kind of repetitive. Probably every divorce procedure will be similar. The idea here is that you can create your template, your library of templates for each of the cases, where your stories are generic enough to fit almost any situation, but still very relatable, so that there is one person specifically that is the main character of your story. And so, for example, you can have that as a person whose marriage is failing. I need to be able to dissolve my legal tie to my spouse so that I can get on with my life. It's quite bold, written in this way, but probably true, sadly. Or as a person whose financial interests are entangled with those of my spouse, I need to be able to ensure that my assets are protected, so that blah, blah, blah. And then I can add stories that are there optionally, because maybe only some people will have children. And so you can, in your template, you can have optional areas that you can remove. And this becomes your checklist. And that helps you not having to reinvent the wheel every single time, but having a common language within your teams to structure your work. And I would like to highlight as a last thing, the last story that I tweaked a little bit, if you see, and is as a person going through an emotionally difficult time, I want to know what's the process that lies in front of me. And here I'm switching from I need to I want, because not everything is mandatory when the client asks for them. But that's a conversation for prioritization, and I leave to Seb to explore that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Francesco. So Francesco just taught us a very powerful thing, and that's essentially breaking your work down into digestible, recognizable, and sizable chunks. And why is that so important? In order to know what you will be able to do, especially in a complex complex deliverable, you need to understand what is the size, what is the sequence, what is my work plan, right? Who's going to work on what? And starting out, breaking down huge chunks of work into these smaller tasks enables you to do just that. In the next segment, I want to talk a little bit about how you prioritize your work. And by prioritizing your work, you're automatically already beginning to plan your work. And what I want to share with you in this segment is a very powerful 3-step process that enables you to basically plan any sort of work that you're facing, regardless of complexity. Actually, even very complex projects or tasks can be planned with this 3-step process. Before I launch into it, a little bit on the background. This 3-step process is something that I use a lot with our engagement teams and consultants, because it's really easy to grasp. It's very quick, and it enables you to find rapid alignment in your teams regarding priorities and the work plan. So I'm going to go into some detail. If you have questions, we'll share the materials with you afterwards as well. But if you do have questions, do pop them in the chat. So let's take a look at step 1 of the process. It's called affinity mapping. What is it? So affinity mapping is essentially a collaborative sorting exercise that allows you to very quickly go through a large body of work and develop a first sense of what is actually in there. What do we need to do? How can we sort it? How can we order it? How can we prioritize it? It allows informed conversations about priorities and resource planning in your teams. It's, as I said, very fast, and it leverages the collective experience of diverse stakeholder groups. So people from teams may have completely different perspectives on things. Like, to stay in the tiramisu metaphor, there are probably people, I saw in the chat that somebody suggested using sponge cake, right? So somebody might have a very strong preference for that, and they might make an argument that they would want to go with sponge cake instead. So how does this work? First of all, you set a continuum for your affinity mapping. A continuum essentially is just a sorting mechanism. You can decide on the scale yourself. We're using in this exercise that I'm showing you, we're going to use effort, but I was told by a colleague who works in the compliance department of a bank that effort sometimes is not very distinguishable among deliverables in the legal world. So you could, for instance, use risk if that is something that's important to your work, right? What's my exposure in terms of penalties on these different pieces of work? You start out by picking one of these items. So think of all these yellow stickies as stories, as Francesco just explained. They are your user stories, right? And collectively as a team, you pick one that's very well understood, you put it in the middle of your continuum, and then you start sorting all the rest. This is an example. How much time does it take to build? And if we look at the things that we have here, probably a small business is a pretty good North Star, so you could drop that kind of in the middle here. A scarf, probably a little less effort. Space program, likely a bit more. And by going through it, taking turns in your team, you start sorting all the work items on the continuum. You do that in a relative manner, so it's not really about finding the exact point on the continuum where this one item gets fixed to, but it's rather really about comparative. So is this more or less than this? Members of your team can also choose to move stuff around if they disagree. So for instance, if we say this is a paper plane and this is a scarf, maybe some people do very elaborate paper planes and they would want to move that onto the right side of the scarf. Now, this is an iterative process and it's a collaborative process. You're working with your team, people jointly move things around and tag them onto the continuum. And you do this until basically everyone agrees. So what you've done then is inside a group of people, you've created a joint view, an aligned view, and an agreement on the rough shape of your work. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to sort them by orders of magnitude. So what does that mean? So when you're looking at your continuum, you will probably find these kinds of breaking points where the next item is significantly more effort than the previous one, or significantly higher risk than the previous one. And that's where you kind of draw a line and say, here we're having a jump by an order of magnitude in complexity or effort or whatever it is that you're choosing. Once you've done that and you've got all your orders of magnitude, all your breakpoints in, you're ending up with something that looks like this. And here you've already started sorting your work, and you can make it, you can quantify it. You can use all sorts of sorting systems for that. You can use t-shirt sizes for a very rough estimation as to how much time this will take. You can use person days or risk scores or whatever works for you. And this one, we then take that one step further and we start building a portfolio around these items. So what is a portfolio? A portfolio is essentially a set of work, a subset of the totality of the body of work that you're looking at. And by building portfolios, you're forcing yourself thinking about what is it that we actually need in order to deliver value. So as I said, different stakeholders will have very different views on that, on the criticality of certain items. So it's important that as a group, again, you discriminate and you look at the work and you make joint, excuse me, sorry, that you make joint decisions on what you want to tackle. Here we're taking all the items from the previous exercise and we've already kind of priced them out. We gave them prices based on a system that we identified and aligned on. Then we give our participants a budget. They essentially get a fixed amount of person days, or again, whatever we want to use, and we can assemble and start building and combining these things into different portfolios. So once we start looking at these portfolios, people who propose them, they can argue them, they can defend them, and they can make a case for them. And at the end, we decide which portfolio actually gives us the most bang for the buck. There are a lot of tools that you can use in order to facilitate these kinds of decision-making, collective decision-making meetings. We at Oliver Wyman, we use ABC Decisions. It's a custom decision-making framework where team members can approve, block, change, or don't mind a decision. Now, once you've got a portfolio, you can then start prioritizing it. At Oliver Wyman, we like to use a method called Moscow prioritization, which in contrast to many other prioritization methods you may know, works in concrete and absolute categories instead of relative ones. You may have probably seen it when you start sorting your work by high, medium, low priority. Sooner or later, somebody's going to come along with something with a super high priority, ultra high priority, and so on. You definitely want to avoid that. Now, imagine you're going to the airport. Which kinds of items would you bring? So a must-have item is probably your passport, because otherwise you're not going to get past border control. A should-have item is your boarding pass. It's super important. You need it to get on the plane, but you can probably get another one at the airport if you forget it. Toothbrush is nice to bring with you, especially if you want to make a small lunch break. You can brush your tooth before you board the plane. But if you don't have one on you, then you might as well buy one. And bottled water, you probably won't want to bring that because you're not going to get it past security anyway. So with Moscow prioritization, we can actually sort our work into these categories, and we can focus very much on the must-haves here. Must-haves essentially define the minimum viable product of whatever it is you're trying to do. That means if we don't get the must-haves, there is no value in what we're doing. So those are unnegotiable and they need to be delivered in order to deliver value. By prioritizing your work this way, you're actually protecting the minimum scope of whatever it is you're doing. You're protecting it from spending too much time on non-critical items, and you manage to scope the critical path into your work. And I apologize for my voice. I've got a bit of a dry throat. So how does it work? Essentially, we're taking these items and we move them along must have, should have, could have, and won't have. And we're doing so being mindful of the estimates that we've put against them. So we already know the rough size and shape of each of these working items. And we also probably know how much time or money or risk we want to spend on our work. So we can use a couple of best practices in order to ensure that we deliver value. So whenever you're planning your work, must-have items should never make up more than 60% of the available effort. 20% can go to the should-haves and could-haves. And what do you accomplish by that? You're basically building in a buffer to ensure that the must-have items you've identified are definitely going to be delivered in time, in budget. If anything changes during your planning, which happens, you can use the displacement principle, the one in, one out principle, meaning if something gets nominated as a must-have after the plan has been done, you can remove another thing in order to accommodate for it. And that's the three-step process. So let's just quickly recap. So first, we have an affinity mapping where on a continuum, we're giving a rough idea of the size of work that we're looking at. Then we're deciding what are the actual critical elements of this work by building a portfolio and agreeing on the portfolio. And then we prioritize the work inside the portfolio in order to ensure that we deliver the minimum viable product.
Seb, I don't think there was any particular question, but it feels it resonates. There is the dilemma that we always face, fixed fees versus tracking time and keeping that flexible, so time and material. And in general, it feels like, prioritization and estimation could help both teams and sole practitioners in figuring out what's a correct sizing of the fees to charge.
Yes, so this is actually a very good point. Proper planning and proper prioritization of your work actually helps you working in time and material environments, but also in fixed price environments, right? So if you have a very clear and agreed understanding of what it is that you're trying to do and what the minimum output should be, you have a very good chance of delivering in time and in budget.
I would like to read out loud the last contribution from Iris. I hope one of the two was correct, and I apologize. This is a subject that would help engage the industry to the methodology overall. That's very good insight and powerful. We can reflect on that.
I like that. And I like this approach because, so our goal with this session really is to show you things that you can use, and you can use them without monolithically or dogmatically change everything to an agile way of doing things, right? This works pretty much in every context. You can take that, try it with your clients, usually from my experience, but I'm obviously more working in software projects, but it takes about 4 hours with a team of 10 stakeholders to go through this three-step exercise and come up with a preliminary plan. Cool. Let me just share my screen again. And we move on to the next segment. And that is about understanding what is going on. It connects to planning in a way where after you've done the plan, how do you actually keep track of what's going on? How is your work progressing? Are you delivering against the plan? And how can you maintain a global view on that? And Agile has come up with a couple of methods around that. We call them Agile workflows. And in its simplest form, an Agile workflow is basically a glorified to-do list. Many argue that that's exactly what it is, but it is actually much more powerful than that. An Agile workflow can help you coordinating work and priorities among team members, but on many different levels in addition to that. You can ensure that your team is aligned on which top priorities they ought to be working on first. To deliver value early. And you can distribute work among team members according to their capabilities, according to their availabilities, and so on and so forth. And you've got a shared and up-to-date single source of truth on your progress, the scope, the risks also that you have, sometimes hidden risks in your delivery, or blockers that occur that are outside of your team's control. This is a very basic agile workflow. So you can see it's definitely not rocket science. You're working off of a backlog. You have a to-do lane, and a progress lane, and a done lane. A couple of really important points here. Done, what does it actually mean? So you do need to agree on a definition of done. So sometimes when you think you're done, another person might not agree with that assessment. There might be an approval outstanding that you still need to get, or something else needs to happen before the piece of work that you've been working on actually delivers value. One very powerful way to manage work inside here is to work with limits. So you can actually limit the amount of work that you put into to-do in order to avoid overloading your team. That's a really, really important step to avoid congestion and to make sure that everybody has evenly distributed tasks. Now, we can take this basic workflow and we can adapt it, and we can do a lot with it that, that serves your needs. So here we're extending our workflow a little bit. We've introduced, for instance, a blocked lane here. Essentially anything that could happen to a piece of work that, that you or your team is working on that is outside of your team's control. So you can't really influence whether you will be able to finish it in time or not. You're going to put that in blocked. And you can add other ones, like for instance, if a piece of work needs a review or needs some testing or needs some feedback, you can put in another lane for that. You can also sort your work by priority or by effort or by assignee. These are pretty flexible. The only thing that really needs to happen is that everybody on this team, on your team, understands how you're using these workflows and what each of these different stages actually means. So once you've got your basic board set up, and that can, by the way, that can just be Post-it notes on the wall, right? So it's pretty easy to get started with that. But once you've done that, you can be even more granular with your views on your work by using labels on your tasks. So what is a label? Essentially just an added piece of information on every ticket that you create. You can have an assignee, so you know who exactly is working on a ticket. You can have a priority, which you've agreed on before. You can have your effort estimation in there. And then a very, very simple title and description. You can, most of the times in digital boards, you can use all these labels in order to filter for your work. So you can, like in the morning, just filter the board with all the tasks assigned to you, and you know precisely what you're going to be working on. So a few tools that we use and that we recommend in order to bring your workflow digital is Trello. This is something that I want to show you in a little bit. Trello is pretty lightweight, very customizable and configurable. It's got a free basic tier, so it's something that, that you can easily try with your team. The same company also has a slightly more complex product, which is called Jira, predominantly for software development. Lots of custom workflows and integrations with other tools. But just to show you how easy it actually is to get started, you could also just set up a board in a Google Sheet and be done with it. We don't recommend it. There are great tools out there, but it's really that simple. You can use essentially just a Google Sheet in order to set up a board. Let me maybe quickly show you a Trello board. So this, I mean, just keep in mind, the very simple basic board that I showed you has nothing to do with this. This is completely customized. And this is a board somebody came up with in order to manage contract reviews, right? So you've got different lanes set up here. You've got incoming for legal review, incoming for security review, contract sent to customer, review status at customer, signed and closed, reviewed or lost. And with this, you can assign it to, yes?
You're not showing us though the board.
Oh, sorry, I thought I was sharing it. 1 second. Can you see it now?
Puppy always wins.
Nice one. Puppy always wins, that's correct, yeah. So as I was saying, this is highly customized. You can collaborate with your team. You can assign tickets to different team members. You can leave comments. You can add information. You can attach documents. and essentially really manage everything through a highly custom workflow. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about with you today is learning from your mistakes. So oftentimes, and this is the case everywhere, but specifically so in Agile, because Agile is so open and so flexible, a lot of the times people get started with it, but then they just roll with it and they kind of dig themselves into a hole. And they're not learning from their mistakes. So oftentimes organizations evolve, they grow, their deliverables tend to change. They want to generate slightly different types of outputs. So it's absolutely important for Agile environments to continuously learn from their mistakes, to evolve and to grow, and to make sure they're adapted to the needs of the organization. One very powerful way of doing that, and this is something that Ethan loves to do, is a retrospective. So what is a retrospective? It's essentially an opportunity for your team to periodically check in and find out what's working and what's not working. If you do retrospectives right, it really helps the team to continuously improve the ways of working, identifying improvement potentials, and really work on fine-tuning the daily routines. There is a great way of looking at retrospectives. It's really, it's a safe space. It's a circle of trust, so to say. And there's a prime directive, regardless of what we discover, we understand and truly believe that everyone did the best job they could, given what they knew at the time, their skills and abilities, resources available in situations at hand. So retrospectives basically allow your team to reflect on what went well and what needs improvement. People can voice shared or individual concerns. They can highlight areas of importance that are often overlooked, jointly define actions to improve. This is super important. When you do a retrospective, always take 10 minutes at the end and agree on actions. So who's doing what concretely in order to improve the situation. Some formats you can use is what went well to improve in actions. You can see that over here in a tool. People basically nominate items via stickies, and then people can vote on them. Same for start, stop, continue, mad, sad, glad. I like to do sailboat retrospectives sometimes. So what's helping the team? What's the wind in our sails? What's our goal? Are we still aligned on where we want to go? What are the hidden risks, the icebergs in the water or underneath the waterline? And what holds us back? What holds us back? What's delaying us? So some very simple tools that you can use, and most of them are free and online, in order to plan a retrospective is, for instance, Retromud. It kind of mixes and matches a lot of activities that you can do, starting from icebreakers, but also to kind of sorting exercises, brainstorming exercises, and you can basically mix and match a retrospective format for yourself. We have fun retrospectives. It's relatively new, actually. And this is an extensive library also for various styles of retrospectives. It's got a wealth of background information, and it's slightly on the academic side in the sense that it's got a lot of theoretical content on there, but also highly usable. In terms of facilitating retrospectives, especially now in mostly remote-driven environments, you can use Jamboard, which is a Google product. If you have access to the Google Suite, you can just basically launch it from there. And it's a shared whiteboard. Everybody can join, they can put stickers on there, and you can kind of sort through your work. We have Easy Retro, which really you get started in minutes. It's got pre-configured elements in there, so you can run different kinds of retros. And again, it's collaborative. People can just log in their browser and start adding their content. Mural is a very powerful tool, not just for retros, but also which you can use in order to bring, again, like use it like a whiteboard, but use it for many, many other things as well. It's not super intuitive, so some people take a bit of a learning curve to get to it, but it's a very, very powerful tool. So what makes a great retrospective? Bring enough time. So you should really plan between 16 and 90 minutes. 30 is quite quick for the team to really get there into the headspace for it. Give your retro a clear structure with time boxes. Plan some time for an icebreaker to get the team into the right mindset. Collect input from your team, refine it. And if there's a lot going on, then you might even take 2 rounds of refinements. Then do take some time to plan your actions and commitments. And most of all, make sure it's a fun, engaging, and memorable experience in a safe environment for your team. If you're running retrospectives regularly, feel free to recycle some of your formats that are successful, but also keep in mind that you should change it up every once in a while so that people don't experience the same format more than twice. Oftentimes in these time-boxed events, you would find some discussion that is highly valuable, but not directly related to what you're trying to get at. So what I do then in that case often is I have a parking lot, just an area to put down ideas that you want to discuss later offline. And always very important, ask for feedback so that you understand how people enjoyed the experience and what they were getting out of it. So that's it on retros. I wonder, has anyone ever run a retro in their context? Or Francesco, Ethan, do you want to share any experiences with retros?
I think that was a good question. We got at least one person in the chat who has run many of them. And yeah, just to bring out of the chat what we were saying there, they can be incredibly simple. It's as easy as just gathering the full team and just asking 3 questions. What's going well? What should we celebrate? And then asking, what do we wish could be different or better? And finally, what are just a few specific things we'd like to try to change? You don't have to do that format, but that's like a really basic one that I find always works well and brings out a lot of good discussion, a lot of good coming together as a group, and then specific things that will make you better. So when you come back together the next week, it was better than the week before. And this is why this is my very, very favorite Agile methodology or like thing to do, is because it just by saying, let's all gather as a team frequently and step back and look at what we've done and get better at it. You identify the pain points, you brainstorm ways to solve them, you experiment with solutions, and eventually you find solutions and you become better and better. And if you're trying to do that, then just by finding the problems, if you're just a little open-minded, do a little research, go back to the notes from this session, you might say, oh, the problem we're facing is because we're not planning well enough. Well, maybe we should break our work down into smaller chunks, and you go back to the lesson number 1 that we spoke about. Or it could be any of these other things. So retrospectives give you the opportunity to pull in all the other tools and methods that might be useful to you, but also to pull in just the ones that actually apply and will add value to you right now. So highly recommend them as a starting point. I'm just checking out the chats here to see what else is going on.
While you check it, and I may add that they also make for a fantastic team building activity. You can keep them very unstructured. We organized one at the pub one time. We did another one in a gaming place where we played a ping pong tournament among us. You can go and have them in the park if it's summer and it's nice. You can really, and moving away from the office when possible really helps looking at things from a different perspective.
Yeah, so especially to switch up perspective every once in a while, one format that I really like to use is like a book review, right? So you could essentially ask the team, look at the iteration, and look at the last 2 weeks as if it were a novel, and write a book review. Give it 1 to 5 stars, and write what you liked about the book and what you didn't like. And it really helps people to think about their work, first of all, in a fun way, but also maybe from a slightly different perspective. And it's really interesting to collect these diverse ideas and views, sometimes different views on the same issue. And there are lots and lots of different things that you can try that also kind of play into the creativity and the playfulness of people. And as Francesco was saying, it can happen anywhere. You don't really need to be in a meeting room for that. bring people together in a safe environment, but that can be a park, that can be a walk together, or anything you'd like.
So I guess I want to hammer the retrospective point one more moment because I love them so much, but then I want to pick up on the chat, which is highlighting this important planning fixed fees question. So just one more thing on retrospectives is that, as Francesco said, they're great for team building. They're also great for repairing teams or forming and healing teams. In the last week, I've done this at work where I had two teams who really were working on very similar things and had to have a lot of interactions, but had never been brought together with one mission. So they kept bumping into each other and just bothering each other. I brought them together as one group, said, hey, let's try to solve this bigger mission together. And just by starting to do weekly retrospectives in the group, after 2 weeks, they're already operating as one team, supporting each other, empathizing with each other, finding ways to make life better for each other. It's just been incredible to see the power of that. And actually, tomorrow I'm going to do the same thing. I live in Costa Rica, as I said in the chat, in a big Latin family. So I actually have my brother-in-law and his family living in the house with us. I think we're going to start retrospectives too to figure out how to merge the two households together a little better. So we're all going to get together up in the living room and grab a bunch of sticky notes and put what's going well up on the wall and what we hope could be better and pick 3 things to improve every week and eliminate those small frictions that get in the way. So they can be useful anywhere. Yes, I will chat those 3 basic principles of the retro. So unless anyone really wants to say more about retros, I want to go back to the planning point. And it's this point where we were saying that when you're planning out your whole project and you're doing your must, your could, your should, etc. I'm going to pull up the right slide for this. That you could put 60% of your plan for the iteration could be must-haves, and then 20% for should, 20% could, basically 40% for other things. When this idea was first introduced to me, it was very counterintuitive, because if I'm planning a 4-month project, 4-month delivery of value to a customer, and I'm trying to figure out what fees to charge for it, and I kind of know what the work is, I have an estimate that it'll take maybe 2 months of work, most likely, plus or minus 75%, because I'm still pretty uncertain, then I'm going to take my midpoint estimate and add a bunch of contingency, and that'll be the fixed price that I'll give to the customer. And I always imagined, well, if I'm going to do that, say I double it for contingency, then what I want to do during the project is I want to run through and get all the top priorities, the must-haves, done first. And then if I finish them halfway through the project, if my estimates were on point, then I have the rest of the project to get through the other, the shoulds and the coulds, and they'll be happy that we did even more than we promised to because we committed to just the musts. And that could work, but the problem is if your estimates were not right on everything, and they never are, this must is underestimate, this one is overestimated, et cetera. If your musts are all a bit underestimated, then you end up just slipping farther and farther behind the initial expectation of when you would deliver things. And by the end of the project, you might get all of the musts done, but your customer is going to feel massively disappointed because your project plan said they would all be done probably halfway through, and they hoped they were going to get to the rest of them. And you're constantly, every iteration, renegotiating and explaining why you're behind. And it's just not a good feeling. So what this slide is saying is there's this planning concept where you say, by the end of it, we will deliver everything you must have. And unless there are unforeseen problems, we'll probably deliver a good amount of should and could. But we're going to do it by delivering a certain amount of musts in every single iteration. Every 2 weeks, we'll deliver a chunk of musts all the way through to the end. And because in every 2 weeks, we've baked in the contingency, only 60% of the week is dedicated to musts. The other 40% is shoulds or coulds. Therefore, if that must turns out to be harder, you just spend the whole week on the must, you drop the should or could. But that's less important to the customer. They still got their must for the week. And the next week, the same thing. So you're always delivering your musts on time. If you're lucky, you're doing a lot of your shoulds and coulds. And not only do you deliver all the musts and some should coulds, but you also give this sense of we're in control, we planned well, you know what's happening, and you have a good sense of how it's changing. If the shoulds and coulds are getting dropped a lot, you early on see that your lowest priorities will get dropped. So that's what this concept was. And I think if you're thinking, how do we take sort of uncertainty, a rough sense of the estimate for things, and turn them into a fixed price that we can commit to and feel confident we'll deliver, this is a very interesting, different take on it from what was intuitive to me at one point. So I hope it's helpful to call that out to people.
It's a great point and great description, actually. And I think it also plays to the iterative nature of planning, right? So essentially, What you're not doing is you're not going into the beginning of a project, come up with a master plan, and then expect it to hold all the way through till the end. And once you plan in iterations and you're refining your plan going forward, for instance, with each sprint planning, you're gaining more and more certainty about the viability of what you're planning for, and constantly revisiting it, and also kind of spacing the new nuggets of information that you find out about your items into this Moscow prioritization with the 60-20-20. It helps you to stay on top and evolve your plan as you go along and learn more details about what you're delivering.
And I saw someone saying you'd love to use this with the kids. So I'll share with you how I've used this with the kids. So I mentioned at the beginning, I do use this stuff. So we didn't really highlight this, but often an Agile team at the beginning will do a team charter exercise. Who are we as individuals? What are we here for? What is our mission as a team and as individuals? And how do we all fit together? So my family has done that. We laid out our dream of all the things we want to be. Every week we pick a focus value. That's kind of like our iteration planning. What will we be better at this week? Each child has their own big goals, their specific skills they're working on, and so on. And we started it all actually on our whiteboard wall with everyone drawing themselves and mapping out their wishes. The next one is, this is Moscow prioritization on paper with the whole family figuring out what to do with our holidays in December. And it really helped. We had everyone write their own version of it. So this is my 6-year-old writing his musts, his coulds, and his shoulds. And then we merged it all into our plan for the day and for the week. So you can get good mileage out of it in the personal level as well. And with that, I think we can wrap up the formal presentation here. Just to remind you, we've covered these 5 points: the basics, the overview of Agile methodology, that really important concept of breaking down your work into chunks you can actually understand and make sense of without detailing it so much that you've just wasted all your time planning things you might never get to do. Ways to figure out what to prioritize, the Moscow prioritization, the portfolio building, all of those exercises. The workflows, like the Trello board we showed, so you could see at a glance, what do we have left to do, what's in progress, what's done, and get as much more sophisticated as you want and need to, break it into swim lanes, whatever. And then finally, the retrospectives, to learn from your mistakes, to constantly improve, become a better team, become better in how you do things. So we picked those 5 out of many, many valuable things out there because we thought they would be most transversal, most likely to be useful to you all. And you remember at the beginning, I asked you all to get out the note paper and jot down one thing at least that you could put into practice this week, either at work or personally, but somehow to get value out of this session. So I hope you all have done that. And if we end early and the Q&A is not too active, then what I will ask you to do is take the last few minutes and take that one thing you plan to do and turn it into an action. So actually book it in your calendar when you will talk to this person or gather the team for this thing. Book it into your personal calendar, send an email reminder. Actually, I'll use my phone, put an alarm on your phone for Wednesday afternoon to go do this thing. But make sure you get the value out of this so that we didn't just waste your time. And thank you for the time you've given us. We really hope it was useful. And we'll turn to the Q&A now. And the question, is there a LinkedIn group for this? I'm not sure I know what you mean. We 3 are certainly on LinkedIn and happy to take contacts and give advice as much as we have time to do.
Okay. Ethan, there's a couple coming through Q&A now that we've given people some space to think.
So before we move on, it's a nice question about the LinkedIn group. There are countless, and most of them are very local as well. And there are lots and lots of meetups too. So basically communities, interest groups around Agile methods. Francesco's very active in those in Dublin. I'm doing a few of them here in Berlin where I am, but they're very local, right? So if you're connecting with the Agile Network in Australia, you'll probably find user groups and communities in your local cities.
Yep, and there are 2 very good questions in the Q&A now. One of them is, where do you start to get people interested in Agile in our organization? Which is similar to one I had answered by text earlier. What's the best way to introduce it? And my suggestion was start small, iterate frequently, and show value quickly. So if you can pick some little project where it's just you and one or two other people who are willing to try something new with you, you give them a little intro so they understand why this might be good and they kind of commit to it. And you bring in just one thing that might seem useful, just retrospectives or just the planning methodology or the prioritization. Use it, and hopefully it's clearly successful and value adding right away. If it's not, then do a retrospective, learn, tweak it, see if you can make it useful. If it doesn't, then try something else, but give it a certain number of tries, and there's a good chance you'll have found something really valuable pretty soon. And then that team has a success, and you can share that with others and say, this method worked for us. It applied very well to this situation. I see you have all these other similar situations. Why don't you try that too? And once people have found the success with one little piece of the toolkit, you say, hey, let's try another one. Or you do a retrospective and say, what are the pain points? Let's try solving that. So that's a nice way to just let it grassroots start taking over and scaling, and the most effective I've found. And that ties into the other question of how do you gain buy-in? Given that planning takes time, how do you get people to actually carve out that time up front to do good planning? And we definitely feel that pressure very much in our industry, consulting, especially premium management consulting. There's always pressure to CEO says, start the project on Monday, and they don't even know what the project is. And sometimes the right answer is to start a project on Monday, and you just have to scope it very carefully so that there's enough planning during the project and enough leeway. So it's not always right to force the right amount of planning for smooth delivery. Sometimes there are different priorities. But wherever you can, you want to get people to understand the value of planning. It's the same thing. Start small, build the grassroots buy-in. Or often it's painful failure that makes people most receptive to the value of planning. So go find someone whose project has just ended horribly or isn't in a terrible situation and help them turn it around. Show them how planning can get it back under control. Any other tips, Francesco said?
No, I think I was looking at the following question. I think the tip you just shared applied very well to the question, what's the best approach when senior people in the organization want to do it? That's definitely one way. It may sound very harsh to say, let them fail and then go and help them. Sometimes people need to experience failure in order to be able to be ready to change. You can't force things on people. You can apply a subtle trick there if you want, which is have them changing without knowing. So like Ethan was suggesting before, you go in, you do a small thing that works, and then you introduce the new one. You can also do it without letting people knowing that you are applying the changes. A lot of Agilists or a lot of people who are getting enthusiastic about adopting a new method will come in with plenty of words, methods, and boards, and sticky notes and post-its. And that can scare people who are resilient, who are reluctant to change. Just go in with one tiny change. Change the one thing, call it whatever you want, just to solve the problem at hand. You have the final vision in mind. You get there one step at a time, gradually.
I was actually answering questions by chat. Did you address that one yet? Because I think it is a good question.
I'm trying to. Okay. Would also be curious to understand at what level of seniority these people are. It's almost impossible to implement a full agile transformation without support from the executive team, but you can do much. At least you can. A full agile transformation would require the entire company to change approach, the core team, but also the services that work around the team, HR, finance. Sometimes legal is at the core. Sometimes it's an internal service at the service of the core group. So ideally, everyone should change, but you can do it locally. No one can prevent you from attaching a couple of post-its on the wall and start tracking things in 4-column, like Seb showed us. And maybe you can coordinate with someone like-minded and track in a second streamline the work that they are doing and start communicating daily 10 minutes every day. That's agile. You just don't call it that way, and probably no one will stop you.
I think in the process, it's also very important to right-size your approach, as Francesco was saying. Oftentimes, coming into a large organization and trying to change them to agile ways of working in a huge monolithic transformation is probably not going to work. So you really need to give people exposure and the ability to experiment with it in a safe space, meaning you're starting out with a small project, a small team, you do a pilot and you examine your results and iterate on that. And that's how you create sort of the seed change and carry these new methods into larger organizations.
And there's no need to call them agile. You know, as Francesco said, just find a useful thing to do. Don't call it agile. Just say, hey, you know, this project seemed to have some pain points. Let's try this method to address them. Formal training.
So I saw this question coming up before. Do you need formal training? Where can you get formal training in order to do agile successfully? In my experience, what's much more important than getting all the certificates, Francesco might disagree on that point, but certainly from my experience, is really at the very heart of it. It's a very simple mindset thing, right? So do understand what the value is, check whether that works for your organization, if there's something valuable for your organization in there, and then apply it. You can start very small. There's no need to apply a complete methodology. So maybe to answer the question in terms of formal training, do get it. It does help, especially when you're planning transformations for larger organizations. And it gives you all the tools that you need. And furthermore, it enables you to understand why they are useful and why they are working. But there's nothing hindering you from starting with the small things. And I would actually recommend that before you commit to becoming an agile expert in that sense. What's your view on training, Francesco? Any recommendations, by the way, for a starter?
I was going to answer in the chat to Kreide, I think. It's very complex to suggest anything because Agile we've seen, it fits in one slide. It really depends what technique, what framework, what specific methodology you want to adopt. There are two that are predominant and in small companies at least, which are Scrum and Kanban. Scrum suits more work that can be planned for, where you can plan at least for the next 2 weeks. And so you set your plan for the next 2 weeks, and ideally you never change it. In that case, the best one I would recommend to start with is CSM from Scrum Alliance. And depending on the region of the world you are in, I may or may not be able to recommend very strong trainers. If you want to go with Kanban, I would recommend KMP, but this is quite more complex. The CSM is quite basic, it's quite fun. The Kanban one tends to be more hardcore, but I'm gonna say it anyway if you're interested. It's a little bit more expensive. To me, the most important thing, now that I have my huge collection of badges, I found that I don't care. But I got an enormous value by picking correctly the right teacher. Some of those have become mentors. I remember some training out of which I was able to simply wow the client, put in practice what I learned a couple of weeks before, and that's the thing that you want to know. To get the basics, you can probably, nowadays, Agile is 20 years old. You can probably find something for free on YouTube. But living, as Ethan was saying at the beginning, it's easy to go and read about Agile. The entire Scrum guide is now 13 pages. It's so hard instead to picture how things really work. Saying we meet 50 minutes every day, yeah, we answered 3 questions, give you a sense of how an interaction can be across the team, but you need the expert guidance of someone who really knows how to make it work to see the magic. And so I would use the training. I wouldn't care so much about what's the organization you join, you choose a good trainer. Do your research, find someone that inspires you and let them guide you. Okay, I see the answer.
I think Terry asked a great question to the panelists, I guess not to everyone. What has been the one big takeaway from Agile for each of you that changed your professional life and how you work? I feel like that's probably a good one to wrap up with as we're up against time. And I'll give Francesco and Seb a moment to think about it because I've thought of mine already. I would say the many, many good changes. The most important one for me is realizing that in normal teams and normal working, we all communicate too little. And the methods and tools and rituals of Agile working are really just encouraging us to do more of that and at the right times and in the right ways. And that's just so powerful.
My point would be very close to that. So Agile really helped me appreciate and celebrate diversity, cognitive diversity in teams, right? Different perspectives from different people coming together and creating a shared vision. I think that is one of the most powerful experiences that I've had in Agile context.
For me, it was learning about the importance of living and working in a safe space. The way you live your life and the way you work and the way you interact changes completely. And the essence of that is that applies to 90-something% of the workplaces is it's okay to fail. It's okay to make a mistake, and together we'll fix it.
All right. Well, with that, we're at time. Thank you so much. Thank you, Fiona.
Thank you so much, Francesco, Sebastian, and Ethan. I know the time zone difference has been challenging, so you've done an excellent job to be speaking so eloquently at 3 a.m. in the morning. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. And just a reminder as well that we did record today's session, and it will be available on the on-demand section of the website later this week, and will also be available in video and podcast on the Outma and CLI sites after the event is finished. We look forward to seeing you at the next session at 3:30 p.m, which will be a roundtable discussion on transformational leadership. And I will let you all go and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.